Exodus chapter 1, verse 15 through chapter 2, verse 10. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and allowed the boys to live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse your child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, yes. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because, she said, I drew him out of the water.
There was a college physics professor explaining a particularly complicated concept to his class when a pre-med student interrupted him. Why do we have to learn this stuff? The frustrated student blurted out. To save lives, the professor responded before continuing the lecture. A few minutes later, the student spoke up again. So how exactly does physics save lives? The professor stared at the student without saying a word. Physics saves lives, he finally continued, because it keeps the idiots out of medical school. In 2005, the music group The Fray released a song about someone who struggled with feelings of hopelessness trying to support a friend through drug addiction, and it was entitled, How to Save a Life. The chorus goes, where did I go wrong? I lost a friend somewhere along in the bitterness, and I would have stayed up with you all night had I known how to save a life. The song, as is so often in life, never resolves the deep longing of the writer to know how they could have done better by stepping into the situation, which they did try to do. As there was no manual, nothing there to walk him through any kind of process. He was sort of going without a guide. He could only do the best that he could with the limited resources at his disposal, and that led him to the feelings of helplessness and anxiety. Surely those individuals who Sue Schreiber read about from the opening chapters of Exodus this morning did not have a roadmap or a guidebook to show them what to do to save the young lives of the children condemned to death by Pharaoh. The midwives are surprisingly named in the text, in a text that doesn't name many of the women. We have Shiphrah, meaning fair or beautiful, most likely, and Puah, signifying young woman or little girl in Canaanite. These were not individuals of high status in the Egyptian empire, but servants to whom Pharaoh gave a direct order, and that was to kill all the male children of the Hebrew women that they deliver. This policy is a direct result of the fear and anxiety around the possibility of the enslaved Hebrews growing too numerous and potentially threatening the stability of Egypt. In other words, classic xenophobia, fear of the stranger or the person who is not one of us. The truth is that we don't know if Pharaoh's concerns had any validity at all, but we can see throughout history how such claims have led to horrendous treatment of refugees, enslaved populations, and foreign peoples living in various territories. Pharaoh's policy, as is the policy of empires from age to age, is to diminish the quality of life or even life expectancy of whatever it is, whatever that non-majority group is, to mitigate the risk of the dominant groups, in this case the Egyptian empires, displacement. Whatever one might think of this plan, if everyone followed their orders, it could potentially achieve a high degree of success. But that's if everyone followed the orders. These midwives did not follow Pharaoh's orders. They, as the text says, let the boys live. And this was in direct contradiction to Pharaoh's intention. These midwives were the first, but only the first, to preserve the lives of Hebrew boys born in Egypt. I always wonder how many other midwives out there were there. I think they talked. I think they knew each other. I think they shared with one another. I don't think this was just an isolated case, but I don't know. When one of these male children happened to be born to a couple from the house of Levi, the tribe of the priests, the mother hid him for 3 months until she could no longer conceal him. It's hard to hide a child for very long. So at that particular point, she put him in a papyrus basket, sealed it, placed it there in the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. I've been to the Nile River. That would be a very difficult thing to do, I would think. But they had a plan in this. Pharaoh had ordered all Egyptians to throw all male newborns into the Nile Sea, but now, in this case, the Nile was being used to save one of these children and to give that child the chance to live. It's a reverse, one of those reversals. And so, for security or to make sure everything went the way it was supposed to, the sister of this child kept watch over the basket that contained the baby. And while she was doing that to make sure that the child made it to safety, that was the plan, she happened to observe, of all people, the daughter of Pharaoh, of all people. And she discovered the basket, opened it, recognized this as a Hebrew male. She knew what she was doing. And she started to take care of it. At that point, the sister said, I have an in here. There's an opening here. So she made herself known and offered, hey, do you need someone to take care of it? Well, that sounds like a good idea. So the Levite woman, the mother, comes and even gets on Pharaoh's payroll to tend to the newborn, as Pharaoh's daughter claimed him as her son, naming him Moses because that means that she drew him out of the water. As a side note here, I think Pharaoh knew as well. I don't think that could have been concealed from him. But there it is, Pharaoh's daughter raising this young Hebrew boy as her own. So this is how Moses and many Hebrew male children came to live even with Pharaoh's edict of death. Perhaps it begs the question at the heart of the song by the Fray, how does one go about saving a life, especially when the odds seem so stacked against one who resolves to take this particular course of action? So, from the text, I'm going to offer a few answers, possible answers here. First, it seems one has to care. And that's not an inconsequential requirement. If one did not care, one would not go to the lengths they did to defy Pharaoh. I think of the famous line from Dr. Seuss's The Lorax. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. These women cared a whole awful lot to do what they did. They were compelled by their compassion and their mercy to spare lives, to save futures. Second, it strikes me that it took a community to pull this whole thing off, a community of resistance. This was not a one-woman show. It was five, when you count, five women saving a whole lot of male Hebrew children. It took Shiphrah, it took Puah, it took Moses' mother, unnamed here. It took his sister, who would later be known as Miriam. And it took Pharaoh's own daughter. For another quote, I hear echoing in my head anthropologist Margaret Mead, who declared, possibly in her most famous statement, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Now, I'm not saying these women all worked together, but their contributions were what they were because they all did this work. They all shared that care, that concern, that drive to do the work they did. They didn't set out to change the world, but they made an impact, one life at a time. Each of these five women, through their investment and extension of self and resources on behalf of these children. Third, these children were spared and saved from demise because these women knew the risk that they were taking, and they took it anyway. They all dared to defy Pharaoh. The midwives were, and the term there was God-fearers. And sometimes we stumble at it, and they feared God. And this is a good thing, it says. But that's the closest thing in the Hebrew Bible to describe people who held to a faith in the God, ultimately they would come to be known, the God of Israel. The motive of the mother and sister of Moses is apparent. He was their son and brother. Pharaoh's daughter responded out of sheer loving kindness, taking the child, who she was fully aware was a Hebrew child, into Pharaoh's own household to raise as her own. All of them were completely mindful of Pharaoh's command concerning the male Hebrew children. They were as clever as they could be in hiding identities and flying under the radar. But they did it. They did it in spite of the potential consequences. Shiphrah and Puah, we learn, were given families by God because of their faithfulness. But that was an after effect, a bonus, if you will, not the reason for their service to God's will in preserving the lives of the male Hebrew children. When something is worth doing, it can mean taking a risk to one's well-being, reputation, or livelihood. Throughout history, men and women have put themselves on the line for the sake of the common good in different ways. This is what these five women, many of them unnamed or at this point unnamed, managed to do. They stuck to their principles and their beliefs about what was right and what was faithful to do. As Sarah Koenig describes, the midwives disobey Pharaoh's direct order. Moses' mother sort of obeys Pharaoh, but in a creative and roundabout way. Pharaoh's daughter also disobeys her father, drawing the boy out of the river instead of throwing him in. All of these women act in nonviolent ways. All of these women preserve life. And Carla Sumala offers that in this chain of resistance that is executed exclusively by women, both Israelite and Egyptian, the Pharaoh's plans are subverted and the Israelites survive. So I do have to say, it's hopefully true that we are not in a position of trying to fight City Hall to keep someone or someone's alive in this sort of direct way today. Although, when we see something that means to diminish someone's quality of life or life expectancy, we may find ourselves where Shiphrah, Puah, Moses' mother and sister, and Pharaoh's daughter were. We may be the ones who have enough status or pull to, simply by us standing up and resisting, disobeying, shift things in favor of the common good rather than that which benefits a few. Deliberate defiance, decisive disobedience can change circumstances for the better. As Mead would say, never doubt. It is remarkable to me how these 5 women altered the course of an entire people, as Exodus tells it. You know, they could have skipped to Moses, as we're going to do next week, with the burning bush. Could just go right there. But we have these 2 chapters that set all this groundwork and focus on these 5 women, mostly unnamed. These unnamed women and midwives of little standing in the empire let their consciences and their moral compasses recognize that what the empire was asking them to do was wrong. And indeed, there was a better way. I think faith communities are often depicted as being called upon to be rule followers. But there is really another model brought to life by these women in the early chapters of Exodus. It is the way of deliberate defiance that will not just abide by the demands of power that contradict what Jesus has taught us and what God has sought for the well-being of God's children. There are those moments when we have to discern for ourselves and with the help of our community of faith what of the world we might accept and what of it we need to defy. It's sometimes in our deliberate defiance that an amazing, life-giving difference is made. So my prayer is, I pray that we discern well in all of that. I pray that we do know when it is appropriate to comply and when it's best and truly right to defy. And may we be a community that supports one another as we make those determinations in our own lives and in our own situations. Amen.